A Wolf at the Door by Toby Bennett. At some time, almost any time not counting history, and counting as all history really boils down to, there lived a man who was neither sick nor well, never content nor upset enough to do anything about it. He lived in the oldest forest in the world, which, times being what they are, is to say he lived in the smallest forest in the world. The forest consisted of only 4 trees, so it could be said that since there were 2 trees on either side of his house, he lived in the middle of the forest. It was a long way to his house when you were coming, and a long way back when you were going, and since the man never said anything really offensive or polite, no one made the effort very often. Anyway, who knows what you might find in a forest, even if it does only have 4 trees. 3 people did take the time to visit once, though no one knows quite when without counting. Whenever it was, the first of them to arrive was the banker. No one knew his real name because no one could read his signature. No one had ever heard him say his name aloud, but he was well respected for his handshakes and a pile of poorly signed papers, which everyone said from time to time might be as safe as houses. The man's house seemed a safe place that morning, so the banker walked straight on in. "Hello," said the man, neither pleased nor upset to see his visitor. "Hello," said the banker, extending a hand worn down to the strength of a knot in an oak tree. "Can I help you?" said the man, grasping the offered limb. "Tea, if you please," said the banker, sitting down in the biggest chair in the room. "Right," said the man, who was not used to visitors and who, while curious about the banker, didn't really care less why he was there. "Anything else?" he added. "Another chair," the banker said as another knock came from the door. The vicar had never been described as fat. No one would have dared. But as he stood in the doorway under the shade of one of the forest's 4 great trees, it was just possible to see round him and discern another figure waiting patiently behind him. Miss Hilda Bunn would not have described the vicar as fat either. For a start, from her viewpoint, there was no way to ascertain just how large he might be in the front, considering how much his rear was obscuring. "Excuse me," she shouted, "is there anyone home?" "Mind your manners, girl," the vicar mumbled back clearly enough for the whole forest to hear. "I was here first. Anyone home?" The vicar's outburst was so loud that the banker almost clubbed himself trying to insert his smooth hands into his ears. The vicar's voice was legendary. Everyone had heard it. The man, however, had of course never heard of it. "Ah, more visitors," he said in a tone of worried indifference. "Oh, and well-wishers," said the vicar, thrusting himself through the door. "Just out for a walk in the woods myself," said Miss Bunn, who, not being very fond of walking, had travelled all the way to the distant cottage in order to enjoy what was supposed to be the shortest nature trail in the world. "Yes, good to get a bit of exercise, especially if it's to the soul," laughed the vicar as he occupied the armchair in a military fashion. The man looked around the room. 3 guests. He was almost happy to see them. "Yes," the man stammered. "Welcome one and then all. May I offer you anything? Something to drink, perhaps?" "Drinking so early in the day is a sign of a degenerate or a genius," the vicar said as he produced a hip flask that had been specially tailored for his own ample hip. Hilda wasn't so sure how ingenious she felt that day, but she doubted the degenerative qualities of tea, and so she joined the banker in another cup. The sun had shifted a bit by the time any of them talked again. The man had so many questions he couldn't be bothered to ask, and his guest seemed to be hanging on his every unspoken word. From the colour of the vicar's nose, he was well on his way to degenerating into genius, but he was still the first to speak. "Wolves," he said, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "What?" said the banker, his face suddenly pale as a contract. "There are wolves in the forest," replied the vicar. His face was ruddy as a pink slip. "That's why I came, to warn you." "But there's only 4 trees," Hilda protested. "This is supposed to be the shortest walk in the world. How could there possibly be enough living space for a wolf?" "Perhaps it's the shortest wolf in the world," said the man hopefully. "Quite the converse, I assure you," said the vicar. "I saw the reflection of the brute in your front window. I'm afraid that you have a wolf at the door." The banker, who understood this sort of talk only too well, was already under the largest chair in the room, reaching for a wad of well-signed cheques. I said, wolf at your door, the vicar repeated ominously, and was rewarded with a half-hearted howl from outside. What should we do? Hilda asked, crossing to the window to peer at one of the all-concealing trees. Simple. We must wait until help arrives, the vicar smiled. But I thought you were here to help, the man said. No, I merely came to warn you. What you do is up to you. Won't we get cabin fever if we stay here too long? Asked Hilda, eyeing the banker, who looked like a carrier if she'd ever seen one. I don't see how we can just wait here for help. You're the first people I've seen in a month of leap year Sundays. Oh, help is on the way, the vicar assured them, raising the flask to his lips. What kind of help? The Almighty will provide. Until then, we need only wait. By dinner time, the vicar's stomach was almost as loud as his voice, and the banker had ventured back onto the chair. Outside, all was quiet, but there might just have been a sniffing at the back door. If we're to stay here, we'll need food, said Miss Hilda Bunn. If we're to stay here, we'll need drink, said the banker, looking longingly at the vicar's hip flask. We'll need meat, said the vicar with a startlingly wide grin. More than one person might have sworn they saw the lamp glint off something sharp. I've got cornflakes, the man confided. A growl shook the room. No one could have told you if it was from outside or the vicar's stomach. No one could have told you how many times the sun went up and down while they waited for the wolf without counting. All that time the man was almost sick with ambivalence. He gave the banker drink at first, but as his smooth hands produced bill after bill, the banker was soon up to his neck in paper, forcing the man to pour the drinks into his mouth. At some point after that, the banker disappeared entirely, and the man was forced to pour tea into the pile of notes and hope that some trickled through onto his guest. But as the banker's regular letters pointed out, it was never enough. The vicar had been eating his meat raw recently. No time to cook at the Last Supper, he'd say as he gulped it down. Then he'd wring some of the banker's damper bills into his hip flask. Each night the vicar would tell them stories of the wolf, reassuring them by pointing out that his own gigantic bulk was set against the door. As long as I get meat, I'll be more than he can bite off or chew, he'd say, settling back against the creaking door's timbers. The man listened dutifully, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, and not really caring to do either. All the unknown while, the man and Miss Hilda Bunn spent their time together eating cornflakes. They took turns at watering the banker and feeding the vicar, no matter how sharp his teeth seemed. Sometimes Miss Bunn would shiver at the thought of the wolf, and the man would hold her in his arms until she stopped, or until the vicar started talking about sin. I've not caught cabin fever yet, she'd say with a smile, giving the banker's pile a wary look. The man would almost laugh when she said it. Inevitably, the vicar married them, the very day they ran out of beef. He pronounced them man and wife with a mouthful of bacon, and the banker witnessed it by scrawling on the forms. From then on, the vicar never spoke of sin again. He spoke of children, of the strength of family against the wolf. He had only stopped to ask how the bacon was holding up. More time may have passed then, long enough for them to raise a family on cornflakes, teach the children to give the banker drink, and how to feed the vicar without getting too close. All this time the man was neither sick nor ill, content nor unhappy enough to do anything about it. Miss Bunn never quite caught cabin fever, but she lost her figure, and she never caught that again either. One by one the vicar let their children out of the house. They would wait for nightfall, then Mr. and Mrs. Bunn would watch for the wolf through the window while the vicar let the children out of the door behind them. By the time the last child had left, the vicar was almost too large to be moved, even though the Bunns were down to their last ham joint. Now the man was almost scared to approach the vicar lest his offering was too small, and the wolf was let in. The pile of bills, meanwhile, had reached the ceiling and was threatening to fall into the room. "Clean that up, girl," the vicar said, thrusting a swollen finger towards the advancing pile of bills. "Much more of that, and you'll not be able to bring me my supper for bills. You know what will happen to you then, don't you?" "The wolf will get in?" "Yes, see to those bills," the vicar said, setting down his hip flask. Obediently, Mrs. Bunn began her work, but as soon as one set of bills was moved, a second was dislodged from the pile. Won't keep the wolf from the door with that kind of effort, the vicar chuckled in the corner. You should help her, you know, the vicar said, looking at the man as he chewed on the last of their cornflakes. For the first time in, well, time itself, the man knew he was neither well nor content, and that it was time to do something about it. I'm tired of this, he said. Oh dear, I'd hoped you were too exhausted to notice that, said the vicar. Not any more, the man said, rising. I don't even remember inviting you in, so I'm pretty sick of you treating yourself like a guest. Steady on there. Without me, you would have been eaten by the wolf years ago. If I'd not been waiting for the wolf for so long, I might have noticed those years pass, the man said as he approached his wife and laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. She straightened as he touched her, stepping back to allow him access to the pile. With angry sweeps of his arms, he scattered the coloured papers. As the storm of paper cleared, the bank manager was revealed. His arms were opened wide and rigid. Many bills still hung like leaves from his thin fingers. His shoes had long ago split open to allow his growth, and now his roots plunged thick and strong down through the floorboards. What's the meaning of this? The bank manager asked, his bills quivering. I might ask you the same thing, the man said. How long do you plan to spill your bills into my house? Can't you see? I'm a branch manager now, the banker snarled. It's what I do. Besides, in case you've not been keeping track of time, it's autumn, which means it's time to grow pink slips. You said there was a wolf at my door, the man said, rounding on the vicar. I did indeed, my son. But you never said what side of the door it was on. Astute, the vicar said, rewarding him with a sharp smile. But by now it's surely too late. Even if I wasn't blocking the door, all your children are gone and your assets are being liquidated even as we speak, the vicar said, pointing to the bank manager's thick roots. Why not just give in? He said, struggling to his feet. The growling in the house was definitely louder now. We've still got each other, Mrs. Bunn answered from behind her husband. And where can you both go? The vicar asked, taking another step which made the weakened floorboards groan. There's always outside, the man answered, backing up with his wife on his arm. And what is outside exactly? The vicar asked, grinning to the back of his head. Good question, the man said as he opened the window and scurried through it. What is outside? His wife asked as they stepped beyond the last tree of his tiny forest. Without answering, he strode into the open spaces beyond. Beyond, where the mountains cut the sky with ice, presiding over 1,000 trees that might have grown while he waited to see them. More trees might have fallen unheard into the river that streamed past, its music leading leaves in a frantic dance. He left there with a woman he loved, a man who was sometimes sick, but often well, content, and if not, prepared to do something about it. He lived in the large forest of the world, and who knows what you might find in a forest with so many trees.